Wayne. All right, we are rolling. This is the virtual brown bag, the place where we get together every Thursday, 12 to 1 Central Time here on Skype. For now, that's going to change because Skype's starting to really drive me nuts. Uh, yeah, it started to behave too it's become too unstable for me. I've been noticing over the last couple of weeks. It didn't used to be like that. Um, so we get together here. We share, tips and tricks. We share tools and practices, and we talk about things that we are currently working on. Things that we just found out in the last couple of weeks. We just learned maybe in the last sprint, and we feel like sharing, and we can share those. And of course, we do record these meetings, so make sure to not share anything that could, get you in trouble. And other than that, well, let's get things rolling. So yeah, one thing that I'm going to share. A couple of weeks ago, I mentioned that I've been having trouble with my 5 or 6 month old Surface laptop, which is an expensive machine, right? And I was expecting to be getting, something really good, but this one, it's probably a defective unit because it's been like locking up really bad up until say a month or so ago. It was just like locking up pretty bad. And then actually, George, I mentioned that, and George said, "Well, it could be like the cooling system or something." And yeah, I think that was the problem because then I started like checking, and it was getting pretty hot. But then I noticed that it stopped uh, locking up like that, and then I remember there's been like a bunch of Windows updates. So I wonder if that was something like software related. Maybe the OS was doing something that was just keeping the processor going. So that stopped. But last week there was another. It may be just a coincidence. There was a Windows update, and 1 or 2 hours later, the main screen just went out on me. The touch screen on it, it's dead. That's why I'm actually using my Mac right now, but on the Surface, it's just dead. So I have two external monitors plugged into it, so I'm able to do some work on it, but I'm like gradually moving things out of it, transitioning it over to my Mac so that I can then just turn in this computer and then hopefully get another unit. It's still under warranty and all that, but it's so frustrating, man. It may be like this one unit that's a bad unit, but it's being very frustrating. And the experience, we talked about the badass book that George recommended, making users awesome and how you make your users feel. The whole experience for me as a user, it has nothing but like subpar because it's not like, okay, I do get maybe it's one bad unit. I do get that. That can happen. But I'm thinking, okay, I go back to the website where I purchased this, right, which came from Microsoft, and then I'm reminded that when I placed the order at the time, back in March, I used my Hotmail account that's associated with my Microsoft credentials, and every single email that came from Microsoft confirming my purchase, it ended up in the junk mail. So it's like emails coming from Microsoft to a Hotmail account, which is Microsoft, ends up in the junk mail. So that does not tell me a good story, right? So then I find those emails, I'm reminded of that, and then it's like, okay, if you need to use your service plan, click here, click here, click there. Okay, you file a claim. You go there, okay, file a claim. What is the reason? What kind of problem you have? And then, okay, now describe your issue here. There is a text box, well, or a text area, right, which tells me, okay, I can actually type the story here. Well, maybe like 250 characters in, it just stops right there. Even though there's like all this real estate in the UI component for me to keep typing, they lock you. So it's like I barely started describing, hey, the computer started presenting this behavior when and then it's okay, dude, shut up. Just say it doesn't work and send it over to us. These little things, I feel like a stupid user. I feel like I'm not valued as a user. And I just take that to me like I took note of that. It's like, okay, I don't want to have my users go through this kind of experience, right? That's the kind of lesson that I want to get out of it. Like this is really bad. When you spend like almost $4,000 on a computer, right? It's not something you got off of Walmart for like $200, right? You would expect something better, the overall experience, but that's not what I got at all. So I'm very frustrated with that and trying to like, what are the good lessons that I can get out of it? So, all right, I'm stopping my rant now.
That's good stuff.
Yeah.
Plus, I don't have anything like super specific to talk about this week. I
Yeah.
don't know. Let's see what I wrote down. Does anyone else have anything they want to talk about? Max, you're like interviewing and applying, right? What are you working on? What are you working on?
Yeah. I was actually going to say thanks. I really appreciate the conversation we had last week because, yeah, I just finished an assessment and I got an interview scheduled on Tuesday for it. And one of the things they mentioned in the feedback they gave me was good naming practices, which I remember, Claudio, you were saying that's one thing you think is a feature of really good code. And I did go out of the way to kind of like make the names super clear, even though they were longer sometimes than I usually would have done. So that turned out well. Also, George, I really appreciated your article on testing and just like getting in the mindset, because another comment they had was writes proper unit tests, and they said it was high quality code. So I'm like, all right, um, so that wasn't something they taught us a lot in Operation Spark, but I felt really grateful. I was like, man, I'm really glad that I had the chance to, learn about what you guys thought and then apply it.
Oh
So,
man.
so yeah, I'm just working on like general interview questions, like tell me about yourself, stuff like that. There's going to be some kind of coding problem, some kind of technical problem. So just working on little simple stuff. They sent a list of things that would probably be, that you could help prepare yourself with. And so I've already gone through those once. I'm going to go through them again, working on optimizing them. Just little stuff like that.
Very cool, man. Glad to hear it. Thanks for sharing. That's awesome.
Sure.
Very cool.
Yeah,
Nice.
that's good. I've been all this week. I've been thinking a lot about like interviewing and networking because I'm rewriting all of our boot camps like lectures around how to hunt for jobs and all that. So yeah, that's like I literally just got off of doing a lecture about the interview process and how to prepare for interviews and so on.
Thanks.
So yeah, that's just 100% on my mind. Also, so I've been recommending this for people, and where like something people get like they send you a take home coding assignment or something like that, and it's just like not even close to enough time,
Yeah.
or or you just don't think you could do a great job on it. So like I've been making the recommendations like you can't do a great job on it. I mean, there's 50 other people that are going to do at least a fine job on it. So why not do something different then? At least something that stands out. So I was like talking to someone last week and about it. I was like, all right, like they're like, yeah, life stuff came up. I just didn't have time to do it. Or no, he had actually, it was a 2 hour thing and he like just didn't know the language terribly well. So he'd asked for a review and was like, yeah, this looks really bad, honestly. And I kind of explained it to him. I was like, like, all right, well, you can't do a good job. Why don't you do like a write-up about what you would want to do if you could, like how you would go about it and stuff like that. And he literally just messaged me. He's like, "Yeah, they want a follow up. They want to do a follow up interview. Like it's a Hail Mary, but Hail Marys do work sometimes, right?" Yeah. So, right. Like I mean, I know I'd be impressed that like if someone like did that. Not that I would do coding assignments like that, Like, it depends on what they're looking for, right? But if what they're looking for is someone who's a problem solver, who's always trying to leave stuff better off than they came from there and find what they can do regardless, well, then that demonstrates it just as well, if not better, as actually doing the problem. So, yeah. It's cool.
Yeah, that kind of stuff is so tough. It seems so, you never know what people actually want. And it seems like it's hard to get anyone to actually look at you. Like in my position with kind of fresh out of a boot camp with basically no experience except for the projects I worked on. It's like, man, yeah, that's really good advice.
Yeah, and for feedback, if you do get an interview, just ask for feedback in the interview. Like, you're not going to get any feedback afterwards. Like, it's, by the time that people have time to think about lawyers and stuff like that, they're worried about lawsuits and stuff like that. Same reason why, you can't technically, if you're an employer, you can't you have to be very careful about what you say about when doing references. Like, you basically can be like, yes, they worked here. Yes, this was their job title. But if in the interview you ask for feedback, this is someone that just spent several hours sitting across the table from you or something, or in video chat. You're real people there.
Mm-hmm.
You're way likelier to get something useful then.
Right.
Yeah. Gonna give away all my tricks.
Yeah.
I don't know what's everyone else been playing with. What's everyone else working on? Because I'd like to talk a little more tech stuff. Or not.
I've been studying for the Azure Solutions Architect exams, and I'm going over Azure backups and backing up VMs and things like that. That's interesting. It's not necessarily an area I really want to get into, or I'm dying to get into, but it does make sense.
Does Azure have a development story for if you want to write code without actually writing into the, being connected to the cloud? I'm just trying to find if any of the cloud providers actually have a story about that.
Or you mean so for Azure, you could develop against their emulators, locally.
You could download an emulator locally?
Yeah, they have a storage emulator and a compute emulator. And it's,
okay.
You have to have at least the free install SQL Server because they use that as, to simulate Azure storage and things. But I use it every day.
Okay, that's nice. All right, yeah. I have kind of heard that Azure has the better development story between AWS and GCP, but I haven't had an opportunity to get in that.
If you're a .NET developer, I think that's definitely true. Mm-hmm. For some of the other languages, I think it may vary back. I mean, I don't do that much development outside of Microsoft platform, so I don't know that I can really speak to that. Azure has gotten a lot better with, at least with JavaScript, I know. So.
Yeah, everything's still using JavaScript nowadays. It's eating the world.
Oh my god, I've ran into the worst Node JavaScript bug yesterday. It's actually kind of a confluence of VS Code and also a Node bug. So I work with a couple juniors, and one of them just in the morning he sits down to his code, and suddenly when he runs the project, it crashes with an error from inside of Node modules about how he's got the wrong Node version set. He's like, what? This was working yesterday and didn't even install anything. And then also we look at the stack trace and it's pointing to a global package and one that we definitely don't use. A WebGL one, or this is a server application. We don't use WebGL at all. And I'm like, well, something changed in your system, good luck. But like, he jumps back a commit, and it totally works. He just jumps forward a commit, and there. We'll look at the commit. There's no package JSON changes. There's no package lock changes. What the heck's going on? And eventually, we like figure out. So here's what happened. At some point, he was typing in his editor, and the editor completed a word to cross-validate, right? At that point, VS Code, being helpful, saw cross-validate that was not a variable that was in scope, and offered to import it from a known package. And he flexibly he hit it. At the top of his file, it added const cross-validate equals require brain.js. Brain.js is not a package that we have installed in our project. Don't even know what it does. Right? So why the heck doesn't it fail with a error about a not found module? Like, why this like node version change? So he eventually figured out, here's what's going on. Node, the resolution order for required is you start from the place where you require, and then you start looking up the directories, basically, for other node modules, all the way up to the root. It's actually kind of a useful trick. I use it to do pseudo modules, which I can maybe show later. But eventually, it goes all the way up to the global modules. On the global modules, it did find brain.js because it was it was something he had globally installed like months ago just to play with it for a hot second, right? And at the time he installed it, he had a different version of Node on his computer, so it's still for that. And then so now it went to that, tried to load it from the global modules, and then crashes because of Node version, which is like, how are you even supposed to find that, catch that? And what if it hadn't crashed due to Node versions? No one would have found this until they installed it to their machine, assuming they didn't also happen to have this installed in their global packages. It's like, wow, it's like that. Like, that's definitely one of the things where it's like, oh no, JavaScript, like you can't be doing this. Like, the entire point was that you were supposed to be easy for like beginners to write, like understand. Like that was the whole idea, and we added so much crap on top of it. It's just like the only solution is like, well, you got to know.
So, I've seen that same process.
Yeah.
In, I don't know, 5 or 6 different environments.
Yeah.
Different languages or tech stack or whatever, where it starts out, this is the easy thing to do. And people want to do more and more stuff. To do more stuff, you have to make a whole bunch of decisions about things like package management, how you're going to find, and the thing that always amazes me is that we go through and have the same set of arguments over and over and over. And I'm thinking specifically about package management, because one time I happened upon the Node GitHub site where they were discussing how they were going to do package management and the pros and cons of all this. And I'm reading it, I'm going like, these are the same arguments, like literally the same arguments that the C people had 40 years ago. I mean, it just like, the trade-offs are the same. It's the same arguments we had with Microsoft with DLL hell. I mean, it's always the same set of things. It's like, you want to provide an opportunity for things to work, right? So you have to decide, well, how hard is the system going to go to find the package that you're trying to use, right? And every time you do that, you expand the amount of knowledge somebody has to have to be able to actually solve a problem like that, right? Like, the process you just described sounds exactly like what I dealt with .NET Framework 1 and 1.1.
Yeah. it's some. I'll say Node has found some new ways to screw it up. It's like now you have the ES6 module syntax, which ES6 modules to begin with was a big.
Yeah. So I'm pretty sure the C++ guys have made all of the mistakes we could possibly make. I saw this thing just recently about the different ways to initialize a variable in C++, and there were like 15. That all meant something slightly different. And I was like, I remember why I never wanted to do C++.
Yeah, but C doesn't have. How many ways does C have? C is simpler.
Yeah, C doesn't have that many. I don't know off the top of my head. Every time they add some new fancy feature to C++, they end up adding a new way to initialize a variable that's, slightly different, right? The thing about C++ is they have to maintain backwards compatibility. I mean, they really do. You can't change the language of C++ any way other than adding things to it. And it's been around long enough that, it's getting pretty darn complicated.
And I think that that's like the core issue. Like that's why the arguments are so similar with C++.
Right.
Because they have the exact same thing. I think to a lesser degree, you have the same issue with .NET. Because they don't have to maintain backwards compatibility, but it's Microsoft and that's like one of their highest values. In the meantime, Ruby world, they go, haha, no, and then you have completely other issues.
Yeah, it's all about trade-offs. You end up with one set of issues or another, right? Like none of this stuff is easy.
Right. I don't know.
I'm gonna step away for a minute, guys. I'm gonna pick up my lunch, but I'll be right back.
Yeah. I do feel like we've done it long enough that we shouldn't be running face first in some of the same issues again, over and over again. But yeah, yeah, there does need to be more people with long gray hair designing languages and systems. But yeah, no, because the whole thing with Node right now is like I tried to switch to ES6 modules because the language supports it. The problem is that not all dependencies do it. Are expressed that way. So I'm sure there's a way to do it, but I can't afford the time to figure out. It doesn't work out of the box, and there's no obvious way forward. It's just wild. Like the way that you do it, that you for yourself can make it work on your project is to have use a different file extension. But if your dependencies don't, that doesn't help you. So it's wild. Yeah. So let's see. What else we can talk about? All right.
Oh, yeah, go for it. If you got stuff there.
Yeah. I can talk about React and React context.
Sure.
And get nerdy over there on that. I do feel like I figured a good process out for something that I've been trying for a while to figure out. So let me maybe share my screen. Let's see. Let me set stuff up first. How do I share my screen? There it is. So let's see. Org load. Cool. Let me make a larger font size too. Options, customize Emacs. Oh heck, 24. Why not? 18. 24. All right. So let's see if I can kind of demo it nicely. So with React, you kind of have this issue in components, right? So you want to, let's say you're in a component, users, right? Users list, right? So you might write it like this. And you want to be able to load like the current list of users, right? So let's say you have your API function, get users equals get all users equals fetch users, whatever. That's good enough. So how do you like normally put that in your application? You do something like const users, comma set users equals use state, and if you're good, you abstract all this away. But let's say we're not that good, and then we're gonna do use effect. Do you do much React, Claudio?
I was doing it up until March.
Okay.
And then the current project we are on Angular.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So something like this. So you might do that, and then you would return not users. No. Otherwise, do something. Well. Right, and then we go users.map. Y key equals u.id, u.name, something like that. So that's like maybe a very basic component that you use to do that, right? That's not going to work in here. We just have to go in here now and paste it. Okay. Need to wire up a new mode to org. So the thing that kind of becomes interesting then is like, all right, well, what do you do? Well, so first of all, what do you do in tests, right? Because this is probably like in some file that's like API.js, and this is in your user list file. So if you want to test your user list in tests, you don't want to actually hitting the real backend. Or if you want to, even put it in a storybook, you don't want to hit it at the back end. You want to have like a stub, right? So the solution is use context, right? Let's do this. So in here, so what we're going to do, JS, so this is your API.js. Right. So in here, we don't actually you do this directly. What instead we do is do something like const API context equals create context. I'll do it the long way, React, right? And we give it a default context that looks like this. So it's just an object that has all the stuff, and maybe we export that. So you can use like a different API context provider and only export const use API equals use context API context. So you do something like this. Okay. So then in here, let's say we do this, it becomes, we go ahead and, you know, just to make this a little easier on myself, I'm going to make this not use JSX, create element. Because JSX just makes it hard for me to work with this mode. Then we do create element. Then lie, and we pass in a key. I don't want to like bore people, so if anybody wants to talk about anything else, that's cool too. All right.
Good.
Yeah. So we do something like this, and there we go. And yeah, I think that's it. Sure. So how do you do this here? Well, we don't just do get all users. We do const get all users equals use API, right? And maybe we add get all users here so ESLint doesn't complain. Right. So that's then becomes the solution for that. Okay. And that's cool. So now in tests you can do, you know, or in storybook stories, you could do something like where you do API wow, then I'll have to do this again. API context.provider value equals stub API functions. Or you could even just do get all users, and then just a function does promise dot resolve stub users, right? Something like that. And then close that up. And now you do user list in there. So in general, I think I'm like super duper powerful. Dynamic scoping, I'm a big fan of it. I think there's like, we grossly underuse the entire concept as an industry. I love that React is doing it, because now like everything in that componentry is going to be getting this API. Like, doesn't matter if user list itself is referencing a bunch of other stuff, and that will it in order to resolve when I do use context of API context, it looks up the componentry in order to figure out where it comes from, not the scope chain, not the lexical scope chain. That's great, cool. Where this becomes tricky now, the next bit is you say, all right, but I want to add an auth token to all requests. And like, sure, you can say, all right, well, in that case, maybe we go and we take that and we say, all right, well, we'll do const API fetch equals args fetch and do URL comma merge args and I don't know, I think it's something headers auth token, right? So you could do that, and then now you're calling API fetch instead of that, and great, hunky dory. The problem then happens though, if you're like, yeah, but I don't have current auth token. Like that itself is based on the application state because someone has to be logged in and have retrieved the auth token. And I want to be able to stub that out, like in tests, right? So it seems like I need kind of like a second context layer so I can stub stuff out. So this was like kind of like the first project where I had enough time to like figure out that flow. And basically, because the problem is that like I can't make API fetch come out of a context directly because like the default is defined at this top level, right? There's no context to draw out of there. So the trick is that like realistically, anytime you actually using the hook, you're using this use API thing. So the trick is going to be you then put API fetch in a context. So export const API fetch context equals React create context API fetch. Then you actually, rather than having this be the object itself, you have it be a factory for that object.
Okay.
And then this right here becomes a tiny bit more complex. As API fetch equals use context. API fetch context. And then you do const create API equals that. And now you're going to return create API fetch. So now anytime you call use API, it's going to flow through this stuff. Yep. And what that means is now like in your app frame or in your login, right, wherever it is, what you can do is you can now say something like, you know, okay, like const app frame equals const current user token equals use state, right? Use effect get user token, somehow set it. So you're going to be doing your query, whatever. You can base that on, you can have a login button, however you do it. But now what you can do, return API fetch context dot, and let's make this just a bit more robust. You know, we'll make this. We'll do this. So we'll create an API fetch factory. Right. So you pass in the token in there. API fetch is just a matter of calling a factory. Fetch factory null, and we don't even need that. We just go ahead and put that in here. By default, it doesn't have a token set at all, right? There's nothing you can do. But now what you could do in here is go in and say .provider value equals API fetch factory current user token. So this is going to be all your children. So do that, and now you just do children in here. And now any of those children, when they resolve their API, it's going to call in here, which is going to try to resolve a API fetch context, which is in this case going to be set to the one with the current user token, and then it's going to resolve its API factory, and it's going to call that. And anytime I use get all users now from within my app frame, when I'm logged in, it's going to automatically have the auth attached to it. In fact, the really nifty thing is if I use it outside of the app frame, it doesn't have the auth attached to it. I can have both logged in and not logged in contexts at the same time. It doesn't have to be a global state. It's a state of the component tree itself, or a subsection of the component tree, which I've been trying to figure out like that workflow for a little while. I figured it out a couple months ago, and it's just so much nicer to work with than anything else. So like it makes it like really, really straightforward to add in any sort of like cross application stuff to the queue. And again, I don't have to like, what is this really achieving? What's achieving with you create context, which is first class React concept. Right. And then it's achieved with you using a couple factory functions, which is not even like the thing. Like, so like, people are like, oh yeah, you should put that in a node module. I'm like, I don't think I should. It's just a couple of functions that are combined. Like I don't want to, I'd rather people like understand this than like just be pulling in a new node module. So I found that really, really fun. I enjoyed doing that. I could be putting in the file names directly in here because that's the thing. Wait, is this a new feature? Oh no, that's just emojis. Never mind. I thought it like auto completed my header, like the headers, because Emacs just recently updated. But no, it still doesn't do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
But we're gonna do like emoji driven programming.
Yeah.
This is cool, man. I had no idea that these things were possible like that. That's very cool.
It's yeah, I think it's really like context is such a big concept and such a powerful concept, because what it is at its core is a whole new mode of controlling variable scope. It's not new. It's actually, I'm typing this in Emacs, and Emacs is in part so powerful and configurable because it uses Emacs Lisp, which uses dynamic scoping by default. And I'm like a big fan of dynamic scoping being the default, being available inside of, editors, because the thing that you want to do with editors is to make them configurable for developers, and you get that for free with dynamic scoping. But like even it just in React, it's this concept that like doesn't actually exist anymore in most of our programming languages. It just doesn't. And it's so powerful. And I wish there was a way to like just add it to raw JavaScript. I've been trying to figure out a way to do it, but I haven't had a lot of time to think of it. And there might be something like around getting really fancy with prototypes that's possible. But that I've got nothing. And the whole async and await really kind of, once you go through async and await, that kind of really screws you up because you can't just like set globals anymore. Like and just toggle off of them. Like you can kind of with JavaScript rely on the fact that it's it's run to completion semantics. Like it's not going to thread switch or anything like that. But once you have async and await, you can't rely on that. And most things are async nowadays, so
Right.
it's very limited in use. Anyway.
Ooh. Now, is this something you got from current projects that you're working on, or just side projects you're having fun with it?
I figured it out in the current project, so it's working in production.
Cool.
And it's totally okay for me to share because I just retyped it in front of you. Like, I'm not copy pasting code. It's the concept. Yeah.
Interesting.
Cool. So this is why React is better than everything else, because it has actual like CSE concepts that are useful and cool. It's not just virtual DOM. Like they actually make an effort to use all the CS stuff and have it be useful. And they're actually doing this interesting things with how suspense works, where I can imagine with how they do conditions and stuff like that. Like I could imagine that bringing in stuff like restarts and so on, which is a little limited because it's specific to the component tree. Like you can't just do all JavaScript shit with that, but it's still like super, super cool and useful. Yeah.
Did you say how suspense?
What was that? So suspense. It's error handling basic mode in JavaScript. So suspense. Suspense I believe is still experimental. What they have. Oh my God. What's the term? The way that you handle exceptions. React exception. I should be searching the right browser. React. Error boundary. So that's kind of neat where like there's a component that you can put around a subtree, and then any error from that happens in a subtree, you provide like bubbles up to that, and that component catches it, and you provide a fallback for it, right? And so you kind of provide a fallback and said render this instead, right? And then you kind of tell it, well, like when these things change, try to re-render it. So that's all well and good, but that's not groundbreaking. The interesting thing that happens is, what if you then say, well, let's say you're loading data, right? So you would get there's no data there. You're trying to render no data. Do that. So what happens then if you throw the fact that you have no data, so you can catch it with your error boundary, and you can catch it with your error boundary and render like with a spinner or something like that. But then I haven't fully gotten into it. I think that there is the part of it that they're talking about is like, well, what if what we throw is not an exception? Like what you throw is like a continuation. Totally possible. And there's just like really interesting stuff you can do around there. So that part of it is called suspense, and I think it's like experimental in React.
Okay.
And again, it's experimental. It should be experimental, but there's like neat stuff you could do with that, because basically it's not just here's an error. It's stuff further down the tree can be passing things up, and I think if you do it properly, you could do stuff like restarts where you say, all right, well, run as if it wasn't an error, but in the part where it's an error, do this instead. And you can do that from the higher level. And that could, because that's something you could do with like lists. Like so it definitely like there's a lot more exception handling modes that don't exist in other languages.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
fun trivia fact.
Yeah.
There's a language that had that feature and nobody knew it.
What was that?
VB.net.
Ah! VB had like some cool stuff. It was just
It
annoying
had
to-
this feature where you could catch exceptions, and based on the type of exception, you could have it go do things.
Yeah.
And it was actually super dangerous. And I don't know that I ever saw anybody besides me use that in production.
Yeah.
But it was exactly what you were describing. It was. It took a little while for some people to get their heads around what you could do with it. I mean, there was some real basic stuff you could do with it, but most of that was you could do it in C Sharp at the time. You could do this. You could break out different kinds of exceptions and go do things, but you couldn't say, "Oh, with this other thing, which is pulling this other, state or function or whatever." It was weird.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right. Instead of the part that threw the exception, do this, and
Yeah.
then do everything the same. Right. It was like, which is like super useful because you can you can implement retries that way, like
Right.
retries,
All sorts of things.
yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. So again, lists.
The tricky part of that, though, is if the root cause of the exception is actually that you just blew up Windows. Well, your code's not going to work the way you expect it to.
Right.
Right. And the same thing is going to be true with JavaScript. It's like, oh yeah, but if the problem is like the browser blew up or some feature crashed out, that may be a problem.
Yeah. And I mean but that's the trick, right?
But,
you have to like put
right,
guardrails.
it absolutely
We're
is right.
doing it in this situation.
But,
Yeah.
Mhm.
And again, like that's why I like React because they're trying. They're trying to be different and use stuff, and good on them for trying. Because hopefully, I don't even need React to be the thing that wins. I want those ideas to percolate.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Hooks is a super weird idea the way it works. I hate the way it works, but it's so slick to use.
yeah, I was trying to figure hooks out a couple of weeks ago, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to push this one off until I have more time to actually look into it because it did not immediately make any sense to me.
It just use it, just use it, and it's fine. No,
Well,
what it does.
but I'm using it indirectly. I'm not actually writing JavaScript. I'm writing F# that gets translated to JavaScript, and there is some ways to use hooks that way, but it's like there's a little bit too much in terms of the layers in between me and the basic idea. If reading the documentation is one of those things where it's like, oh, if I was a really good React programmer and already understood how hooks worked in React, right, then this would make perfect sense. But I don't have time at the moment because I'm just a kind of below average React developer to go figure out hooks.
Yeah. Like I think like the thing there is the thing to understand, like they don't really admit it, is like hooks is totally a hack. It's a horrible hack that depends on the fact that JavaScript have this run to completion semantic where like you can't have a thread run away or wrench away execution and share like it wouldn't work at all. That's the entire reason you have like rules of hooks where they have to be in the same order and you can't like call them conditionally or stuff like that. It's because what's happening is when you enter a component, there's a global like state being set that says this is the component that's currently rendering. So when you do like use state or something like that, it's just reading the current component out of there, and that's how it knows that that's the component the state is for. Like I remember like before when I first saw like hooks, I was like, okay, think I get. Let me see if I can like hack something together that kind of works this way. And like I did, and it's just so gnarly under the hood. And I was dubious about it, but it works super slick like in practice. So cool, right? It's better than using life cycles. And just like at some point, it'd be nice if the language advanced to a point where you didn't need those hooks.
Yep.
Very cool.
Okay,
right.
guys. It's 1
Time
o'clock.
to-
I have to drop off. Been a good discussion, though.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you.
great stuff. Thanks, guys.
Yep. Thank you. All right.
Have a good one. Hope to see you all back next week.
Later.
Later.
Awesome.